George Kilpatrick Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. We are so pleased to be joined by Dashiell Elliott. She is the program officer for the Central New York Community Foundation. And as you know, Community Foundation is a great partner with Inspiration for the Nation. And they have done something very significant within our community. It is the Black Excellence and Equity Fund. And Dashiell is here to talk about that fund, but not only that, talk about why that fund exists, what's the point of it? And I'm really interested in their philosophy. What do they call it? Trust-based philanthropy. What is that? And they've certainly issued a program paper. Now, let's go with the full disclosure. Kilpatrick Media, who produces the show, is a recipient of the Black Excellence and Equity Fund. And everything you see in this production has been made possible by the Central New York Community Foundation Black Excellence and Equity Fund. And we really appreciate that. Let me tell you how significant that is before we get to Dashiell. Well, it turns out that, I don't know if I should tell folks that, but I will tell you that we really haven't been in the building physically where this show emanates from in over a year and a half. And because of the support of the Central New York Community Foundation, we have not missed a beat in bringing you the inspirational, positive conversations, particularly for Black folk in our community. We've talked about mental health in particular. We've talked about COVID. We've done all of that, and we've done it right here. So, Dashiell, I just wanted to point that out to you, how significant when you talk about what's the impact of this fund in elevating Black voices in our community. Well, you got your poster child right here because of what, and the timing, right? So what would we have done if we didn't have this capability? What would the show sound like? Would we have access to all of the opportunities? I just did a filibuster, right? I'm supposed to say, hi, welcome to the program, but I really wanted to share that with you. And I wanted to do that in real time because it is significant and it is the truth.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, you spoke about being able to keep the show going without any hiccups along the way because of the support for the fund. And that's really brings us back to, one of the many reasons why the fund was even created was not only to build capacity of already existing organizations, but also on the cusp of COVID as well, what that was going to do to organizations that don't have that large financial backing of predominantly white-led institutions, right? Black-led organizations are typically funded out of the pockets of those who are running it. Sometimes the people who are leading the organization are also doing those direct services, paying for the materials and rarely even being able to pay themselves for that great type of work. So this fund was meant to alleviate some of that pressure off of their budget, out of their pockets, and be able to have that space to focus on innovating, creating, and just doing the really great work that our people do.
Initially, you committed $1 million for this effort over a period of time. How has that changed? Is it the same? Have you increased it? What's the story?
Yeah, so their initial commitment, you're correct, was $1 million. So far, we've actually received, and it's only been a year, received over 4 million in requests, and over close to 80 first-time applicants to the foundation within our 90-year history, which is amazing to see. So far, we've gotten close to $800,000 out for the fund. So we're getting really close to that million mark, and we're working to be able to incorporate the Black Equity Excellence Fund within our budget so we can have this going on in perpetuity as well.
That's really important. And I talked about this, but you said that this is trust-based philanthropy. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. So trust-based philanthropy is, it's really one of those kind of jargony terms, but to put it simply, it is funders trusting the people who know the good work that they're doing, who know it, that they're going to do it well. And so eliminating those barriers such as really long application processes, making sure that we aren't asking for a whole bunch of paperwork because the funder is going to take on that due diligence process. We might have to take on a little extra work but it at least lets the organization focus on being creative and innovative and making sure that they can be able to access the funding in the easiest way possible. And so how we decided to go about this process for the Black Equity and Excellence Fund is not asking for backup material. So our sub team who works on this is our grants team that has a sub team of all Black staff members who work specifically on this fund. And so we will do the extra due diligence. We'll follow up with the organizations, one-on-one, but we also have a council, our Black Equity and Excellence Council, who's all Black as well, who also helps us with our due diligence process. The other component of that is for our application process. Typically, grant applications are really long, strenuous, very jargony. The Black Equity and Excellence grant application is about 6 questions long, and you can submit up to 10 minutes of video, up to 10 minutes of audio, up to 10 PowerPoint slides, or you can do a 1-page narrative. I've even had folks just call and talk to me over the phone, and I'll type it up myself. So just trying to make it very easy for folks to be able
very accessible, right? Because a lot of the organizations are grassroots. Some of them are, not all of them. Some of them are grassroots, and you also provide, there's fiscal sponsors as well. And I really, I think that's actually unique. So, are we in another round yet? And I know that there was just an announcement over the summer, but is there another round, and when is that next round?
Yes, so actually we just concluded our most recent round, and notifications went out to those grantees last week. And so we were able to get out another $250,000 to those grantees. So those announcements will be rolling out, and press conferences and interviews will be going out as well. And so the next official round is going to be in the summer of 2022.
Next year, 2022.
Yes. However, a new development that we have, our council has decided to allocate a certain amount of money so they can do a sort of offshoot or off-cycle type of funding throughout the year to help organizations who might have an event or might have a program that does not necessarily fit into the timeline that we have for our larger grant round. So that's a more recent development as well.
And the grants are up to how much, or it doesn't really matter? You just put in what you think, and then the council decides what they can fund?
So the grants are up to $75,000, but we do have listed on the website levels to that. So if it's an organization that it's either an individual project or maybe a for-profit, the cap is $10,000. If it's a program that is newer or a pilot, it's around 11 to 25. If they're expanding an existing program or project, it's about 26 to around 50. And then for capital projects, big, large renovations, that's around that $50,000 to $75,000 range. And exact amounts are on the website, but it at least helps folks to be able to have some sort of guide and to not be so overwhelmed when creating their budget.
Dashiell Elliott, Program Officer for the Central New York Community Foundation, and also part of the Black Excellence and Equity Fund and the decisions around that. And part of the creation of this fund, or for many of these issues, centered in sort of a response to as you put it in your paper, a reawakening, right? Very clear reawakening of racial injustice in this country, centered around the murder of George Floyd, and organizations looking within themselves to see, to examine their practices as well as what's happening in their community. We'll get to the organization piece in a minute, but part of this is to, as you describe in the paper, is to alleviate poverty and the historic underrepresentation of particularly African Americans within the overall economy of this community. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. African Americans typically are the folks who are doing the frontline work, typically working in human services, and are also those direct service providers. And so we know that folks typically aren't making that much money, but still doing so much great work in their community. The two really don't really mesh that well. And so having this fund available is showing, and also the paper starts to highlight those inequities in regards to pay structure, in regards to getting Black folks out of just these programmatic roles and moving into the upper echelon and those C-suite level positions. It also is talking about, alleviating the budgets and having this reawakening around how are we as funders going to take a step back and stop telling people what we think is best for them and how to solve issues that are a direct result of oppression, right? This is, you can't expect people to solve their own oppression. So what ways can we empower and shift that power dynamic in order for folks to be able to want to creatively help themselves and creatively get things done in a way that is not going to be take away from their emotions and also be emotionally laboring as well.
Yeah, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the role of the Central New York Community Foundation. So let's take a step back, and then we're going to take another step forward and talk specifically about this fund. What is, for those who may not know, what is the goal of the Central New York Community Foundation as a philanthropic arm in this community?
Yes. So the Central New York Community Foundation really acts as a steward for charitable purposes. So when I think about philanthropy, the easiest way to understand it is there are the 4 T's of philanthropy: time, talent, treasure, and ties. And so the foundation really kind of takes all 4 of those and works with folks who have, that treasure component, the dollars, and to be able to take that invested and based off of those returns, be able to give out, grants to the community. And our grants team works to help distribute that money, while our development department works to be able to cultivate those donors and figure out their interest and make sure that we are providing grants that align well with their interests. The other component of that too is, sometimes you can think of the foundation as there's, you have the United Way that acts as more of a checkings account, and the Central New York Community Foundation acts as more as a savings account, something that builds really slow over time, but also being able to give for a longer amount of time as well. So we also have, not only does it have to deal with grants, but we also work to build up folks from the professional side of things. We work in some sort of some capacity in policy making, such as lead remediation. So we're a little all over the place, but ultimately we are here for charitable good. And anything that really has to deal with that, that's where we really have a hand in.
And so one of the quotes in the paper is that advancing racial equity can translate into meaningful increases in consumer spending, as well as state, federal, and local revenues, and decreases in social services spending and health-related costs. So you're really saying that this investment is not just us doing a good thing. This is really about the stimulation of the economy and providing people with providing access to individuals who have had historically been not able to gain access, if you will, by and large.
Absolutely. And for an example, one of our more recent grantees in this particular round, for example, one of the grantees in this particular round is our first time actually helping with something a little bit different out of the regular funding landscape. So a grantee came in asking for assistance with their mortgage. And this is something that is very different for us because we typically don't fund those types of things. But in taking the time to learn that this debt that they had accumulated was hindering them from being able to be more programmatically creative and to have that alleviation off of their budget, our council felt that it was our duty to be able to take that mortgage off of that small bit of mortgage off their plate, right? And to be able to let them get to the next level. And it makes you think about the Black community and how that barrier between generational wealth and how there's that little bit of debt that just keeps people from being able to move to that next level. And that is what our council felt. They felt like this was that on a grander scale. And if you could just remove that thing, then people can be able to move forward. And this was that in action.
Wow. I mean, and that's a great example of the creativity, right? Because if you just go by the book, if you will, then no, it wouldn't qualify. And certainly a lot of things wouldn't qualify. But again, if you go back to the grant's purpose, which is, no, you tell me.
So the overall Black Equity and Excellence Fund's purpose is to be able to build the capacity and the financial vitality of Black-led organizations in Onondaga and Madison County.
Bottom line, that was just a layup. It wasn't like you know, yeah. But one of the things that you also did is that, and we talked about elevating voices and things of that nature, but you're also engaged in your own organizational introspection around Black excellence and equity and how that shows up within your organization. So two-pronged question here. I want to talk about that, and then also as a Black woman in philanthropy and that whole, what that is like and how you got into this space. So let's start with the issue of, let's start with Black women in philanthropy. Let's start with that.
Sure. So, Black women in philanthropy, there's not many of us. And so, one of the things that I like to make sure of is that I'm talking about how amazing philanthropy is as a career. It's something that is seen as almost like a elitist, and there's gatekeepers really all around it. And so, trying to just kind of like bust those doors wide open and being one of the few. I've talked to many of my peers throughout the country, and it is this position of power. There is still institutional and systemic racism even within these particular roles that we possess. And so, but however, being at the table where dollars are moving around and decisions are being made, more Black voices and more people of color voices need to be at these tables, because we're able to do things like the creation of the Black Equity and Excellence Fund. We're able to have that discussion on if something might be a little tone deaf or not. We're having folks who can at least have a voice, and a voice that's going to be heard in these spaces that are making decisions about the Black community is huge. And so working within philanthropy has opened up so many doors, and it also opens you to the vision of generational wealth being very accessible. Sometimes it's presented to the Black community that you got to get rich. But when you're working within philanthropy, you see that generational wealth is something so simple as a life insurance policy, right? And, just starting things off.
I can hear Vicky Brackens, our money person, saying
it's just so simple. It is so simple, but we're taught that it's so far away. And so there's these myths to debunk and all of those kinds of things. And of course, again, then there's that fiscal and financial management, and folks constantly say, why don't we see more Black people in development? Why don't we see more Black financial advisors? Well, when you have not had this large interchange of money going in between generations, there's not too much to kind of really track. And so trying to change that narrative and getting more folks to work in philanthropy can start to actually get your mind thinking about having a CPA as a buddy, or, talking to a financial advisor, and of course, hopefully becoming more philanthropic in ways than we traditionally see. Black people are actually one of the most philanthropic demographics, typically giving some of their last to youth programs, their churches. And so being able to find ways to streamline our giving has been really great to see. And more recently, Black people have actually shown the trend of being able to wanting to purchase blighted buildings and communities and renovate them for the greater good. So that is something that also Black folks are currently doing with their generational wealth.
Yeah, and how did you get in philanthropy? I'm going to get back to that organizational question in a minute, but I wanted to know your journey to this place.
Yeah, so my journey is actually, I think I was born to be in philanthropy. I grew up with a mother who was a single mom, and I was involved in after school programs and community-based programs. And when I was younger, I'd always hear about the grant. The grant is allowing us to have this art program. The grant is allowing us to go to this field trip. And I was like, whatever this is, I need to be a part of it. I love doing this. So I thought I needed to work with youth, youth related things, because that must be the thing. And when I realized after doing some youth related work and some human service work that no, there are people who make these decisions, and they're the ones who are helping to push these really great ideas forward. Who are those people? So I was doing some work at a local organization here, wrote a grant to the foundation, and also had they had an opening at the time. And so the two I got the chance to meet with them on one side, but also from the other, applied for the position. And of course, through mentorship and being able to, through some of my other mentors here that are locally being able to come into the foundation. But when I came to the foundation, I also made sure to still educate folks who are of color about philanthropy, and so brought more folks of color. And once I got into the foundation, I realized, hey, this is pretty white. Let's try to, liven it up a little bit with folks of color or different types of age groups, and that has been well received. And so I've been working internally also on our diversity and inclusion efforts, but mostly equity is what I'm strong about.
Yeah, what I love about what you just said, Dashiell Elliott, Program Officer for the Central New York Community Foundation, is that when you're in a position and you do what you can from where you are, right? That's how change happens. And shout out to the Community Foundation for being willing to listen, right? Because that's also another piece of that, right? Like you got to be able to have a voice, but also see those changes happen. And I know that it's a challenge because that's not historically how they've done business. And I don't mean they've supported many things. I don't mean it that way, but I mean when you start to look within your own organization, and let's talk about that your own journey as an organization, looking at how racial equity is impacting your own self-examination, and then how and you kind of tweaked a little bit about how you're making those changes, but organizationally, how is that happening?
So organizationally, it's been happening in a few different ways. From some of our more internal efforts and working with staff to go through lots of different trainings, figuring out, our own individual styles of where we see race and equity, to doing some more of that team building efforts. And it's not, it's going beyond those kind of Myers-Briggs assessments, right? It's bringing in the consultants. It's exploring those deep, dark kind of conversations that nobody wants to talk about, but we need to talk about in order to be able to move forward. That ability to be uncomfortable, every single person, and not letting up. So this wasn't new. The foundation, we've been at this work internally for about 3 years now, and I think if we were not doing this internal work for about the 3 to 3.5 years, we probably would not have been able to launch the Black Equity and Excellence Fund. And I'll tell you why, because when you get to the point of being able to have these types of outward facing programs, in order for them to be expedited and in order for them to move swiftly and smoothly, everybody has to be along for the journey. The minute you have someone who's kind of resistant, it's going to slow up the process. And so being able to check that bias at the door, to be able to make sure that everyone understands and is aware of why we are doing what we're doing and who we're accountable to when we're doing these externally facing things, that internal work helps to influence this process. And so the foundation has done a really great job at looking at our vendors, making sure that we are using folks who are MWBE certified, making sure that our staff is really aware of the local issues, but also the national ones, and also doing some of that internal work to make sure that we are culturally inclusive and making others feel like they not only belong here, but can elevate themselves here. For my own equitable journey at the foundation, I've been at the foundation going on 6 years now, and I started off as a program associate, which is kind of on that entry level. And I moved up quickly from there to our senior program associate, to program manager, to senior program manager, and eventually program officer. One of the great things about the foundation that I've seen is that when I'm alongside our CEO, Peter Dunn, our vice president, Frank Ridzi, one of the things that they always make sure to do when I'm in a room is that not only am I being introduced first, but also I'm being introduced as their colleague. So being introduced at all times to folks publicly as an equal. Or even if sometimes if someone wants to kind of try to hop up the chain of command for a conversation, they will redirect right back. And so there's just that reinforcement of respect, because sometimes being young, being Black, being a woman, they probably don't want to talk to me all of the time. And so having folks who identify their privilege as white men, and they know that. And so being able to say, okay, we understand our privilege, but we also know we can use this to uplift the folks of color in our organization, that's huge.
Yeah, that really is. And I think you spoke to this a little bit, and I want to acknowledge that Now, so that's the internal work. So, and I like the term you use, front facing. So now front facing and then internal or external, internal, right? In terms
Mhm.
of how we look at this work. And then finally, I love the fact that you're looking at the historic oppression in our community. And you really kind of talked about that and how it's shown up generationally within uh, our, our community, and you kind of alluded to this idea of creating generational wealth, but and also the fact that philanthropy already exists within our community. And I wanted before I lose this thought, I think her name was Osceola McCarthy. I think that was her name, and this was a woman who took in clothes in, I believe it was Mississippi. I got to look it up. But trust me, the lady in Mississippi who took in clothes and washed the clothes, but that at the time she left $150,000 to one of the historically Black colleges in the community. And by the time you answer this question, I'll know who that is. But I think that's her name. So talk about just tease out a little bit more this idea, because this is all in your paper. This is why I'm taking you to all these different places. The paper that Dashiell and Frank Ritzie prepared is on the Central New York Community Foundation website. Really give you a sense for why this fund exists. So part of it is I guess you can leave us with this idea that if this fund is successful, we will take out, this is a stab at ending generational historical oppression in this community. Can you just tease that out a little bit more?
Absolutely. And in the paper, it talks about there's a few graphs in the paper, and and then one of the graphs, there's a 7% difference in life expectancy, right? And you would
Mm-hmm.
think that's not that huge. There
Right.
should be no difference in life expectancy. That 7% is still too much. And so these factors that we've been discussing this entire time, financial, social, emotional, all of those different kinds of things play into that. And so this fund, although we know it's not going to solve everything, right? There's a wicked web of problems out there, but what it can do is just act as a stepping stone for for generational wealth to at least be able to be a broader thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's in regards to looking at philanthropy as a career, or whether it's in regards to applying for a grant, or whether it's in regards to starting your own fund, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we think about those millionaires next door, or we think about, you have to shift your mind when you're thinking of philanthropy, of how do different demographics give, and how do they hold on to that money, and what are they passionate about? And that's why legacy is so important. You don't have to have $1 million to leave a legacy. Your name does not have to be on a building to leave a legacy. Although that does not discredit those who are able to do
Hey,
that,
look,
you are
right?
just as important. You are just as important, whether you're giving $5 towards a fund that, a cause that is exciting to you, or whether you're giving 5 million. And so that's this paper is really trying to show that not only are Black people doing really great work in this community, but that we can act as just an assistance and a guide to be able to build upon the already existing great work that's being done.
And I have the answer to my philanthropic question. And I only missed it by one letter. It is Osceola McCarthy. And she gave $150,000, setting aside just enough for her to live on. She gave $150,000 to the University of Southern Mississippi to fund scholarships for worthy but needy students seeking the education they never had. And when they found out what she had done, and this was in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, they tripled her original endowment. And I say that because she did laundry. I mean, right? She took in clothes, and I don't know. Maybe I needed to make that clear, because for saying taking clothes is kind of an older term, and if you're not of this
Yeah.
demographic, you may not know that. But basically, she did laundry, and she did that and was able to generate. So to your point, there are ways for us to do it, and she certainly did it. And if you listen to Vicky in the morning, you can figure out how to do it too. Okay.
Well, and that's why I think that's why the Black Equity and Excellence Council is such a huge piece of this, because they they're the power dynamic that lives there. Like our council makes the decisions on these grants as well, but also They are completely trained in grant making, the way our staff is trained, and they're completely modeled after our existing board, even down to
Mm.
their charter. So the foundation now has a pocket of people who, at any time when we're looking to engage more board members or do board recruitment, Black individuals who are ready and willing to be able to serve on our larger board when we have openings, as well as also future donors. So it's helping in those areas as well.
All right. So, how do people apply? How do people give to the Black Excellence and Equity Fund?
Yes, so you can visit the Central New York Community Foundation's website, cnycf.org/equity, and you can learn more about how to not only give, but also how to apply to the fund. You can also, if you want to talk more about giving towards the fund, you can contact our Vice President of Development, Tom Griffith, and he can talk to you more about that as well.
Great. Well, Dashiell, thank you for the work you're doing and also for educating us on the Black Excellence and Equity Fund. The next round of funding for that fund will be June. I said June, summer of 2022. But they've got some other little things that they may be able to do in the meantime. cnycf.org. And if you want to support the organization, you can do that. Support not only the Black Excellence and Equity Fund, but also they might be able to help steward your funds as well as they've done for other non-for-profits in this community. Dashiell, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Inspiration for the nation.